And something happened that affected education in the last 2 years. In my
I don't know what you're
experience,
talking about.
yeah, no. In my experience, despite best intentions, a year of homeschooling under COVID restrictions usually meant earnest effort for maybe a quarter of the year, and then free for all, as the parents were overwhelmed.
Yeah. I noticed. I don't know if this is something any of you guys noticed with if you've had students who have come in from being homeschooled, but like this past year, with a number of our actually even some of our students that came from traditional schools or boarding schools or whatever, the thing that I noticed among almost all of them, the skill of note taking, not a one of them had it. Like we would go through class and I would notice it took me, after a couple classes in, you kind of notice something's off and it has to realize not one of my students is writing anything throughout all of class, whether it's the lecture part or whether it's the question answer, going through the reading, going around the room, rapid fire, but nobody's writing anything throughout the duration of the class. I don't know. Is that something y'all have seen or?
Well, note taking is a pretty rare skill for a graduating high schooler anyway. It's seldom taught anywhere in any organized fashion. So maybe you're the rare genius who's figured it out and you can handle college note taking. But apart from that, I think, well, the situation's been exacerbated by COVID, which has seen teachers pandering more than ever, right? A student doesn't have to take notes. Why? Because he has a recording of the class meeting at his disposal. Yeah. He can just go back through it a later time. Whether he will is a different matter, right? But and you guys might have seen this if you taught at UST. There were some students at the beginning of the semester who would say, "Is it all right if I record your class?" And I would say, "Absolutely not. Get out. I don't want to see you." No, I'd usually say okay. And what I noticed with those students is that they over relied on their recordings.
Right.
And I talked to them candidly, a couple of my students once, and I just said, look, at the end of the semester, if you're doing this for all of your classes, you have way more than you could work through during finals week. I don't care if you listen to this while you exercise and take a shower and all day long, but there's no way that you could focus and digest a course's worth of material, or a course's worth of lecture materials just through your speakers, and then you lose the ability to ask clarifying questions. And so I could always tell the difference. There were students who really, even when I was at UST teaching courses, heavily relied on the ability to record on their phones or whatever. They never did especially well. The students who took handwritten notes always did better than them. And I think that's it. There's just an unmanageable, excessive amount of information to be processed, come exam time or paper writing time.
Yeah, see, and I don't remember I don't recall like being taught how to take notes. And if I was, it was a really long time ago. And so I really was struggling with trying, because I don't know how to teach that. I don't know how to show people how to take notes. I can take notes still when I sit through a lecture, and I can filter an idea and a sub point and whatever. I really don't know how to show that to anybody else.
Yeah, I could put my headmaster hat back on. And one of the things we did at the school where I was previously headmaster, we used the IEW, Institute for Excellence in Writing curriculum that actually starts in kindergarten, pre-writing phase, and goes all the way up through 12th grade. Pre-writing, students practice narration. So they hear a story, they're given some time to digest it, and then they have to explain it to their classmates and to their teacher. And you just practice this over and over again, and that's a pre-writing form of note-taking. One thing I would tell parents when they'd come and meet with me and they'd ask about this program, they would say, okay, so there are basically two kinds of note-takers, right? And it cuts pretty cleanly across the division of the sexes. You have usually the boy who relies too heavily on his memory, right? He says, notes, good. I'll doodle a little bit in my notebook, but you know what? I've got it. I was there for the conversation. I'm good for the exam. And that usually doesn't work out well. And then you have the girls who are like medieval copyists.
Yeah.
You know, they read a chapter and you look at their, you say, okay, notebook chapter. Show me what your notes look like, and it's word for word everything they read in the chapter. And I said, look, you're really not doing yourself any favors. Come test time, looking back through your notes, you've got a whole chapter to read through. It's going to take you just as long. But so the IEW program really tries to thread the needle. It tries to teach the students who would rely too much on their memory a few simple techniques for note taking that complement their use of memory, right? Teaches them to be intelligent about the use of their notes. And then it also curbs the excessive tendency of usually the girls, the high achieving girls, to just copy everything down. Teaches them how to filter what they've heard. So last thing I'll say, the first most basic exercise you do with older kids when you introduce them to the program is you have them do what's called a keyword outline. They read, say, 2 or 3 paragraphs, and say it's a history book, say it's like ancient Roman history or something like that, Punic Wars, and they read maybe 3 paragraphs about the early life of Julius Caesar. Their job as junior high and high school students is to identify the key terms throughout those 3 paragraphs. And they're only allowed 3 to 5 words to summarize each sentence in the paragraph. So you place that heavy restriction on them, and they have to get creative about which terms they choose. And if they keep practicing this, they're going to, start bouncing back and forth between what they write and what they remember, and they're going to work out a system of shorthand that really works for them individually. So it can be done strategically. Yeah, and I think that for those students that really took a hold of it, it made a big difference.
Yeah. I like that.
Makes sense. I never looked at any of my students' notes when I was teaching at UST. I have no idea what they were writing down.
God bless you.
Yeah, I don't know. I just never. So, like with the online classes where I did have all the recordings available, and I chose to do that because I think it can be a very helpful tool, especially if you miss the class or something like that. Though it can be an abuse tool as well. But I'm much more of the, here's your rope. Don't hang yourself, or do,
That is the essential difference between teaching in college
exactly.
and teaching at the secondary or primary level.
All right. Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
And so you get whiplash when you go from teaching in college to teaching at the primary or secondary level, because temperamentally you're primed. You just want to say, look, let the cream rise. I don't care. Parent teacher conferences, what are those? I don't care.
Yeah.
Your kid failed. Not my fault.
Well, but that's actually one of the things that we're kind of having to deal with here, though, is it's kind of like all through the system, everybody's is like, well, somebody else should have taught you how to do this at some other point, and then you get there, well, somebody else was supposed to teach you how to do. It's like, well, you've now arrived at your freshman year of college and you don't know jack, so you can't read, you can't write, and it's like, well, now I'm having to put myself back in that mindset of let's see, now it looks like Julian's internet might have gone out.
Well,
I was gonna ask. I was gonna say, because he had brought it up, but about the teaching multiple skill levels in the same class. I remember when I was still teaching high school, they would try to. Towards the end of my tenure, they were trying to get us to do stuff like this. Was to devise, even if you were teaching the same grade level. Let's say you just had a class of all sophomores, you're still going to have students on the lower end, and you're still going to have students on the higher end. And so they were trying to get us to be able to develop lesson plans where you could break them off into groups. It's like they're still covering the same topic, but the lower ended students, you give them a more general assignment or something like that. But then the higher ended students, you give them a more in-depth assignment, whatever, but it was that kind of idea, is trying to teach different, to students at different levels, but within the same class. It was weird. It was still tough, but
yeah, that's a nightmare. I don't think that ever works. I when I took my job, they still had divisions between regular honors and like AP, and usually it was the same teacher who was teaching all of them. And if that happened in a single class, it did not go well. Invariably, I mean, the teacher will tend one way or the other. The teacher is either going to go with the AP and leave everybody else behind, or the teacher is going to appeal to the, you know,
Lowest common denominator.
lowest common denominator. The bottom feeders.
Yeah.
There's, I when you're pressed for time, if you have like 2 preps, right, you can teach your 2 classes as if they're 6 classes, right? But otherwise it's just not workable.
So
Yeah, I don't see how you do that without sacrificing something. There's no way. It's a really tough spot to be in, Julian. I don't think there's a clear way through that. When I was dealing with the homeschool co-op last year, and it was the 8th through 12th grade class, I had more freedom as to like what I was going to measure for the grade and what I was going to do in the class. And what I ended up doing was the class discussions were very high level, whereas what they had to do to actually succeed in the class was just show me that they did the reading. So I had the homework very low level, discussions very high level. But I don't know if it's going to work for.
This is a Latin class?
Well, yeah. What class is it? I guess that matters a lot.
It's 3 different classes I have to do this in. Latin, religion, and what they call language arts, which I think I'm just going to turn into something like rhetoric. But we'll see.
I mean, I think it's doable. I have some hands-on experience teaching like 6th through 8th graders in a single class, and it really depends on the particular cocktail of kids that you have.
Yeah.
Grade level is an artifice, and it doesn't necessarily say anything about a student's preparedness for a course. And I had 5th graders who could do the work of 9th graders. So I don't know that there's a way to proceed with integrity without deliberately leaving some kids behind that doesn't just start at the baseline. Now, that sounds bad, and it sounds like you might be cheating the students, but you can move quickly. Even kids who kind of think they know what they know, they almost all benefit from some review, right?
Sure.
In Latin, that's a good. I mean, I don't care how many times you learn the declensional system. It wouldn't hurt to have the teacher march you through them again.
Yep.
Just to cement them more firmly. So, and it's the difference between Latin homework taking 2 hours down the line and taking 30 minutes.
The trouble seems to be that by the end of the year, your 8th grade Latin students are supposed to be at a certain point, whereas your 6th graders don't have to be anywhere near that point. So are you going to cover the material in the gap or not? What would you do?
Are you asking me, Joe?
Yeah.
Well, at my school, we didn't necessarily rush kids on. We just had, starting in the middle school, we had a Latin 1 course, Latin 2, Latin 3, Latin 4, and it was the same as our high school class. So if you came in as a 9th grader or as a 12th grader and had no prior Latin, you would be in class with middle schoolers. And we just did Henley 1. And I think the key is really budgeting time-wise in the other classes that a student's taking at a given time, so that a 6th grader has the flexibility in his schedule to push himself that hard. Well, we started in 7th for this class, and I think that made a difference, actually. So that a 7th grader can push himself hard enough to match the pace of a 10th. Now, maybe on the odd exam, or maybe on any exam, you just show a little bit more clemency to the 7th grader. You say, okay, I kind of see how you got that. So you know what? I'm gonna write a note here, and I'm gonna say full credit. But you have to come talk to me to get it, right? We have to discuss this. Whereas if it's a 10th grader, you could say, look, I know that you're able to understand what we've done. You missed this. That's on you. Hard penalty. Make it better next time. So maybe on the back end with assessment, you can kind of deal with it. But it all depends, I think, on what your Latin track looks like. Where do you want the students to get? And every school deals with a student, no matter how ambitious you are with your Latin. Every school deals with a transfer grade, right?
Well, so Julian, are you teaching Latin 1 to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, or are you trying to teach Latin 1 to 6th grade, Latin 1.5 to 7th grade, and Latin 2 to 8th grade, or what? What are you expected to do here?
I think what I'm expected to do is to do Latin 1 for all three.
Oh, okay. Well, then
Um,
that's no problem.
I was gonna say that seems easier or more. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's no problem at all.
yeah. It's just a matter of like, because I still want all of them to be challenged some way or another. And there are some eighth, like I think maybe one or two of the eighth graders actually have it. That would be fine. But
Hey, Phil.
for the,
Phil, could you move your microphone a little bit away from your nose, bro?
Oh,
I think I might be
Dual wind
breeze I'm
tunnels there.
catching. Yeah.
I was telling Evan just before y'all got here. I've been thinking about maybe getting one of those like cool mics that just hangs
Oh,
right in the
With the little
like
windscreen in front
yeah
of it.
yeah that. But, all right.
Protective
there's
shield.
a soft gale.
Sorry, my bad.
A gentle breeze in the background of the conversation.
You never hear about the professional gamers that have to deal with that, even though they have their. But
Yeah.
whatever.
I just never hear about the professional gamers. So I think, Julian, that it's a fairly easy fix. Honestly, homeschooling a little Latin usually really does mean a little Latin. I mean, very little. And so if you march the students through the paces, do you know what text you're going to use? Has the school made up its mind about what an intro middle school Latin course will you be using?
I think they want to use Memoria's first form Latin.
Okay, yeah. So that's their 6th grade text, but I think that would be challenging enough. In my experience, homeschooling parents, even well-intentioned ones who don't have prior knowledge of Latin and are just a chapter ahead of their kids, they don't teach it very, very well. So if you have an experienced Latin teacher who can talk about not just where the student is, but where they're headed, that's enough novelty to keep the kids on track at that age level. I guess another option would be to use just a very different teaching strategy, right? So I think I told you this, Julian, I started Lingua Latina with my oldest. She's going into 4th grade. And that's the Orberg natural method where everything you do is in Latin. You answer, you at the end of the chapter, you have a question answer session, and that's conducted entirely in Latin. I ask the questions in Latin, she answers in Latin. And even the marginal notes are entirely in Latin. So you're always working within the language. Now that starts at a lower level than, than would be appropriate if it were purely grammatical instruction for someone who's completed 1st and 2nd form from Memoria, right? But just the novelty of the formatting would be enough to bring everybody onto the same page. So I guess the practical piece in what I just said is canvass the parents who've previously taught their kids Latin. Ask them what texts they've used, and then use a different text.
Yeah.
That will be enough novelty even for your kids who have a little Latin.
Yeah, I'm thinking, I mean, I was already kind of planning on incorporating some of Orberg's Lingua Latina because I actually have it. I don't know if it's legal or not, but I actually have it as a PDF, the whole thing.
That's just a hypothetical statement.
Don't make those disclaimers. I'm pretty sure you got it from me.
Purely hypothetical. We're not saying a PDF exists. Just saying.
Yeah. But I was planning on incorporating it throughout the year because that's sort of what I did a little bit this past year, but it wasn't very effective. But I think if I go a little if I use it a little more frequently, it could probably have a better effect. But
The younger kids are, the more sincere they are, and the more they'll be interested in a simple story.
yeah,
As they get older, they get jaded, and they don't want to play ball. But so older high school kids, which is what you were dealing with at your previous job, they might not go for Orberg, Familia Romana, the first book, right? But little kids like it, and sixth graders are still little kids. Many seventh graders are still little kids. It's some seventh graders and all eighth graders who have crushing self-awareness.
I remember back
and
when
there's no reaching them.
Yeah, I remember when I was teaching K through 8, but there in the middle school, the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, there was a definitive shift in the 7th graders. Like, yeah, you can tell.
Yeah.
Evan, what do you think about Lingua Latina's efficacy for teaching grammar, the art of grammar, to the student through Latin? Because from what I understand, the role of Latin in classical education is to acquire the art of grammar. And I wonder if the natural method of Lingua Latina actually puts the grammar in the background the same way it does when you learn English naturally.
Well, what's interesting is that if we're looking at Familia Romana, it's not absent lessons in grammar. Those are just taught in Latin. So at the end of the very first chapter, there's a section on singulares et pluralis, right? It's not an anti-grammatical approach. It's not your high school Spanish immersion course that allows you to order burritos and get to the subway in Latin. It's still pretty heavily grammatical. That said, I do think it's a weakness of the Orberg method not to explicitly teach the kids some of that, what I call a philological toolkit that you can use for almost any language, so that kids start to look out for. I mean, ideally, a student learning Latin doesn't just stop with Latin, but turns those same tools on his own language. Now, you'd think that more kids would naturally do that than do that. Kids are very good at compartmentalizing so that the skills they learn in Latin, they don't necessarily carry over into their native tongue. But it's primed. If you've told them what a participial phrase is in Latin, they should be able to carry that over into English. In my experience, though, you still have to give them explicit instruction in grammar in English in a literature class or as a part of a literature class for them to really get it and for them to connect the dots. Otherwise, it's just going to be a set of rules that exist in Latin. Mm-hmm. But, as far as they're concerned, the word I just said there is spelled Their, right? And there aren't rules that govern English use apart from whatever passes the muster with their text thread friends.
I could follow up. I don't want to dominate that conversation. We were talking a little bit before about Latin and its role in the liberal arts and its role for grammar. And I wonder if you could speak to the efficacy of Latin in particular for acquiring the art of grammar. I wonder, there's a lot of incidental benefits that it has. Like, it happens to be the case that Latin was the academic and cultured language of the Western world for millennia, right? That's definitely a strength. But do you also think that there is a strength that Latin has specifically to acquire the art of grammar that, say, studying French or Spanish as a second language wouldn't have?
Is that for everybody, or is that?
Well, I've already posed the question to these guys.
Yeah, we talked about this last week.
We talked about it at length.
Okay, then I'm sure the very first thing you said is, look, the two other languages you mentioned aren't declensional, and that makes a huge difference, right? You have to think critically about parts of speech in ways that you don't when you're dealing with a language that makes heavy use of prepositions instead of the declensional system. There's a lot of inferential reasoning. That's not yet the art of grammar, properly speaking. So I guess it depends on how strict you want me to be about what counts as the art of grammar. Are we talking really strict medieval trivium? Which, fine with me, and that's speaking most precisely. Which would include some explicit reflection on modes of signification, things like that. I don't know that really comes up in a Latin class, except that Latin lacks the article. So sometimes you have to be very careful about. It doesn't come up in your average text, but there are some times where, the classic example for all of us when we were at the center is the use of the word homo, right? Does that refer to a man or man altogether? And there's no article to help you out. Even Greek has more to go on. Usually Latin has to use some kind of circuitous phrase, or it'll use illa, which doesn't really work that well, and which Winnie illa Pooh parodies, actually. But so yeah, I don't. I think that the differences between English and Latin, particularly the free word order, makes it a better tool for acquiring the art of grammar than even in those, you might say, logical propedeutic elements that belong to it according to the medieval understanding. Than you would get from, say, a modern Romance language.
What is how's Greek really structured? I've never studied Greek.
Just to Evan's point about the illa and how it doesn't work.
Well,
This hobbit doesn't work that well.
The very hobbit. Illa can signify somebody famous, famous. The whoever, I don't remember his name, but he's a brilliant translator.
Mark,
a brilliant Latinist for Winnie illa Pooh, not that.
Winnie the illa Pooh. Yeah, that one. That was weird.
In the first chapter, Pooh. There's a joke. There's a joke about illa. Right? It's actually used to stand in the place of ther, THER, in the English version. I don't know if you remember this, because Milne asks his son Christopher Robin in the beginning, if Edward the Bear's name is Winnie, how is that fitting since he's a boy bear? And isn't Winnie a girl's name? And he says, you don't understand. No. His name is Winnie the Pooh. And in the English, it's THER. And Milne says, I understand, but I didn't really understand. And he said, and I hope, no, what does he say? He said, I understand, and I hope you understand too. He turns and addresses the reader, and I hope you understand too, because that's all the explanation you're going to get. So something about the word makes a difference. And so the translator, the guy who's working from the English of Winnie the Pooh into Winnie illa Pooh, uses illa as the stand-in for ther. The made-up word in quotation marks.
Yeah.